our first Prime Minister passed this piece of legislation. And no Prime Minister afterwards thought it needed fixing until Stephen Harper. And so the Navigable Waters Protection Act was initially changed in 2009 when they had a minority of conservatives in the House. And in 2009, there was an omnibus budget bill, actually much longer, over 700 pages, in which one of the things they did was to say navigable, under the terms of the Navigable Waters Protection Act, is no longer defined by the fact you can put a boat in the water and navigate it, which is what it had meant since 1883. In 2009, they changed it to say navigable means whatever the Minister of Transportation says it means. Then they took another crack at the Navigable Waters Protection Act just in the spring in C-38 and said, under the terms of the Navigable Waters Protection Act, which, as you can imagine, if you're protecting the rights of navigation, what you're saying is nobody can obstruct a navigable water. You can't put a dam on it, you can't build a bridge across it, you can't throw down a whole lot of logs and make it impossible for somebody to pass. In order to do that, you need a permit from the Minister of Transportation. So in C-38 in the spring, they'd already passed a series of amendments to the Navigable Waters Protection Act and the National Energy Board Act to say that under the terms of both acts, pipelines were not obstructions to navigation. And if you wanted to make a pipeline obstruct navigation, you didn't look at the Navigable Waters Protection Act, you went to the National Energy Board Act. So one might have thought they were done with the Navigable Waters Protection Act. But in C-45 this fall, they changed it to say navigable now means a listed body of water you can find in Schedule A of the Act. And as most of you will know, I think all of you will know, Canada is a country famous for having millions of lakes. But they listed exactly 97 lakes as navigable. Out of the tens and thousands of rivers that we have in Canada, they listed 65. Now theoretically, we could amend the Navigable Waters Protection Act to add more rivers later on. I put forward 80 amendments to C-45, most of them dealt with the Navigable Waters Protection Act, to try to put back in the notion of navigable means you can navigate it, instead of listed. But the listing, of course, all of my amendments were defeated. I also, in C-45, tried to change something that I think is going to be very damaging to tourism in Canada, and certainly puts in place increased integration of Canada-US security in terms of having a perimeter around Canada and the US jointly. C-45 brought a change to the Immigration Act. I don't know how many of you have heard about this one, where now if you are a potential tourist, you're, say, living in England or Germany, and you want to come to Canada on vacation, you'll have to fill out a form and get permission from Jason Kenney to come to Canada on vacation. This is not for people who plan to move here or who want to be refugees here. Yeah. If any country that currently doesn't require a visa to come to Canada will have to fill out an online form and await permission, or you can't come to Canada. And the exception for that is people who live in the United States, because we're going to merge our security lists with the US. So we'll know who they find undesirable without us having to ask them. So it's particularly going to be devastating. Well, I think it'll be very unpleasant for the tourism industry, and of course the tourism industry wasn't consulted about this. C-45 also contains some changes getting rid of a hazardous substances administrative board, changing other laws, but most of C-45 was not as devastating as C-38, because by the time C-38 got rid of environmental assessment, habitat protection under the Fisheries Act, changed the National Energy Board Act, got rid of the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy, there's only so much more to get rid of. So C-45, whereas in C-38 I put forward 330 amendments, in C-45 I put forward 80 amendments. C-45, of course, is also the main catalyst for what we're now seeing in the Idle No More movement, so we might want to talk about that. C-45 was introduced into Parliament in late September and was passed into law before Christmas. Very, very rapid, and again, as in previous bills, at every stage of this bill, there was time limitation on debate and pushing it through rapidly. There was also one little thing that happened that you probably didn't hear about, and I regard this as one of the highlights of the the last few months. Not the fact, how it turned out, not the beginning of the story. The government House leader, Peter Van Loan, asked the Speaker of the House for a ruling, and it was specific to me. He said the Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands should not be allowed to put forward all these amendments. Now, how do you say that? He said we should group all of the amendments she puts forward and put them to the House of Commons and ask, before they put forward individually for debate, does it look like any of her amendments are going to pass? And if the majority of MPs say, no, none of her amendments will pass, well then we don't have to hear any of them. And what was great was we got a ruling from the Speaker of the House that this is a democracy, there's a radical concept, and the job of Parliament is to review legislation, and we don't decide before we hear an amendment that it can't pass because we know who controls what parties. We actually are supposed to pretend there's a chance that democracy might ensue. So, and that isn't quite how Speaker Andrew Scheer put it, but the media reported on it as a smackdown of the government House leader's efforts to say that I couldn't put forward amendments. So that was a nice thing. At least I think that was one of the strongest rulings yet from the Speaker of the House, that Parliament is still a democracy, and that amendments from, well, for me, from Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands, is consistent with the job of a parliamentarian. That was great.